You know, I'm so sickened by what you did as a university. I'm so sickened by it as it's unfolding in my head that you were like, oh, pretty much, yeah, we're going to put our own out there, is what we're going to do for this testing of data brain mining, which was the second part of that title. If you recall, the second part of the title, I didn't want to forget to talk about Black Mirror and the entire history of you. Did you say, yeah, as a university, we're going to go ahead and study it and we're going to go put one of our own? Of course, you're putting one of your own, aren't you? Right? You're putting a minority woman out there, one of your own. Bull fucking shit. But let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. You're fuku'd all over the place because you are. We will start with the top and we will be data mining every single thought you've ever had. And now it's been practiced on, and they've got the control, right, for what is possible as a moral human being. You're fucked. You're fucked. And I'm so happy you're fucked. Because you have been fucking people out of their children and their seeds for a very, very long time. You're fucked. The Brief, Wondrous Life of Oscar Wow. Close Encounters of the Caribbean Kind. Oscar remembers having a dream where a mongoose was chatting with him, except the mongoose was the mongoose. What will it be, muchacho? It demanded, more or less. After for a moment he almost said less. So tired and so much pain. Less, less, less. But then in the back of his head he remembered his family, Lola and his mother and Nina Inca. Remembered how he used to be when he was younger and more optimistic. The lunchbox next to his bed, the first thing he saw in the morning, Planet of the Apes. More, he croaked. Blank, 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 said the mongoose, and then wind swept him back into darkness, dead or alive. So he almost said less, 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 but what he said was more, more, more. Dead or alive, broken nose, shattered zygomatic arc, crushed seventh cranial nerve, 3 of his teeth snapped off at the gum, concussion, but he's still alive, isn't he? His mother demanded. Yes, the doctors conceded. Let us pray, La Inca said grimly. She grabbed Beely's hands and lowered her head. If they noticed the similarities between past and present, they did not speak of it. Briefing for a descent into hell. He was out for 3 days. In that time, he had the impression of having the most fantastic series of dreams, though by the time he had his first meal, a caldo de pollo, he could not, alas, remember them. All that remained was the image of an Aslan-like figure with golden eyes who kept trying to speak to him, but Oscar couldn't hear a word above the blare of the meringue coming from the neighbor's house. Only later during his last days would he actually remember one of those dreams. An old man was standing before him in a ruined bailey, holding up a book for him to read. The old man had a mask on. It took a while for Oscar's eyes to focus, but then he saw that the book was blank. The book is blank. Those were the words La Inca's servant heard him say just before he broke through the plane of unconsciousness and into the universe of real. Alive. That was the end of it. As soon as Mom's De Leon got a green light from the doctor, she called the airlines. She wasn't no fool, had her own experience with these kinds of things. Put it in the simplest of terms so that even in his adlid condition, he could understand. You stupid, worthless, no good hijo de la gran puta are going home. No, he said through demolished lips. He wasn't fooling either. When he first woke up and realized that he was still alive, he asked for Iban. I love her, he whispered, and his mother said, shut up, you. Just shut up. Why are you screaming at the boy? La Inca demanded. Because he's an idiot. The family doctor ruled out epidural hematoma, but couldn't guarantee that Oscar didn't have brain trauma. She was a cop's girlfriend. Tio Ridolfo whistled. I'll vouch for the brain damage. Send him home right now, the doctora said. But for 4 days, Oscar resisted any attempt to pack him up in a plane, which says a lot about this fat kid's fortitude. He was eating morphine by the handful, and his grill was in agony. But he had around-the-clock quadruple migraine, and he couldn't see squat out of his right eye. Motherfucker's head was so swole, he looked just like John Merrick Jr., and any time he attempted to stand, the ground whisked right out from under him. Christ in a handbasket, he thought. So this is what it felt like to get your ass kicked. The pain just wouldn't stop rolling, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not command it. He swore never to write another fight scene as long as he'd lived. It wasn't all bad, though. The beating granted him strange insights, he realized, rather unhelpfully, that he and Iban not been serious, the Capitan would probably never have fucked with him. Proof positive that he and Iban had a relationship. Should I celebrate, he asked the dresser, or should I cry? Other insights? One day, while watching his mother tear sheets off the beds, it dawned on him that the family curse he'd heard about his whole life might actually be true. Fuku. He rolled the word experimentally in his mouth. Fuck you. His mother raised her fist in a fury, but La Inca intercepted it, their flesh slapping. Are you mad? La Inca said, and Oscar couldn't tell if she was talking to his mother or to him. As for Iban, she didn't answer her pager, and the few times he managed to limp to the window, he saw that her Pathfinder wasn't there. I love you, he shouted into the street. I love you. Once he made it to her door and buzzed before his Tio realized that he was gone and dragged him back inside. At night, all Oscar did was lie in bed and suffer, imagining all sorts of horrible Susos-style endings for Iban. When his head felt like it was going to explode, he tried to reach out to her with his telepathic powers, and on day 3 she came. While she sat on the edge of his bed, his mother banged pots in the kitchen and said, Puta, loud enough for them to hear. Forgive me if I don't get up, Oscar whispered. I'm having slight difficulties with my cranium. She was dressed in white, and her hair was still wet from the shower, a tumult of brownish curls. Of course, the Capitan had beaten the shit out of her, too. Of course, she had 2 black eyes. He'd also put his .44 Magnum in her vagina and asked her who she really loved. And yet there was nothing about her that Oscar wouldn't have gladly kissed. She put her fingers on his hand and told him that he could never be with him again. For some reason, Oscar couldn't see her face. It was a blur. She had retreated completely into the other plane of hers, heard only the sorrow of her breathing. Where was the girl who had noticed him checking out a flaquita the week before and said, half joking, only a dog likes a bone, Oscar? Where was the girl who had to try on 5 different outfits before she left the house? He tried to focus his eyes, but what he saw was only his love for her. He held out the pages he'd written. I have so much to talk about to you. Me and blank are getting married, she said curtly. Iban, he said, trying to form the words, but she was already gone. Se acabo. His mother and his abuela and his tio delivered the ultimatum, and that was that. Oscar didn't look at the ocean or the scenery as they drove to the airport. He was trying to decipher something he'd written the night before, mouthing the words slowly. It's beautiful today, Clives remarked. He looked up with tears in his eyes. Yes, it is. On the flight over, he sat between his Tio and his mom's. Jesus, Oscar, Rodolfo said nervously. You look like they put a shirt on a turd. His sister met them at JFK, and when she saw his face, she cried and didn't stop even when she got back to my apartment. You should see, mister, she sobbed. They tried to kill him. What the fuck, Oscar, I said on the phone. I leave you alone for a couple days, and you almost get yourself slabbed. His voice sounded muffled. I kissed a girl. Junior, I finally kissed a girl. But oh, you almost got yourself killed. Wasn't completely egregious, he said. I still had a few hit points left. But then 2 days later, I saw his face and was like, holy shit, Oscar, holy fucking shit. He shook his head. Bigger game of foot than my appearances. He wrote out the word for me. Fuku. Some advice. Travel light. She extended her arms to embrace her house, maybe the whole world. Patterson again. He returned home. He lay in bed. He healed. His mother, so infuriated she wouldn't look at him. He was a complete and utter wreck. Knew he loved her like he'd never loved anyone. Knew what he should be doing, making like a Lola and flying back. Fuck the Capitan. Fuck Grandi and Grad. Fuck everybody. Easy to say in the rational day, but at night his balls turned to ice water and ran down his fucking legs like piss. Dreamed again and again of the Cain, the terrible Cain, except now it wasn't him at the receiving end of the beating, but his sister, his mother. Heard them shrieking, begging for them to stop, please, God, stop. But instead of racing toward the voices, he ran away, woke up screaming, not me, not me. He watched Virus for the 1,000th time, and for the 1,000th time teared up when the Japanese scientist finally reached Tierra del Fuego on the love of his life. He read The Lord of the Rings for what I'm estimating the millionth time, one of his greatest loves and greatest comforts since he'd first discovered it back when he was 9 and lost the lonely, and his favorite librarian had said, here, try this, and with one suggestion changed his life. Got through almost the whole trilogy, but then the line, and out of far Herod black men like half trolls, and he had to stop, his head and heart hurting too much. Like Farharad? Is that probably how it says? And out of Farharad black men like half trolls. And isn't that funny? Because that goes with St. Nicolas Day, doesn't it? 6 weeks after the colossal beatdown, he dreamed about the Cain again. But instead of bolting when the cries began, when the bones started breaking, he summoned all the courage he ever had, would ever have, and forced himself to do the one thing he did not want to do, that he could not bear to do. He listened. Part 3. This happened in January. Me and Lola were living up in the Heights, separate apartments. This was before the white kids started their invasion, when you could walk the entire length of Upper Manhattan and see not a single yoga mat. Me and Lola weren't doing that great. Plenty, I could tell you, but that's neither here nor there. All you need to know is that if we talked once a week, we were lucky, even though we were nominally boyfriend and girlfriend. All my fault, of course. Couldn't keep my Raybo in my pants, even though she was the most beautiful fucking girl in the world. Anyway, I was home that week, no call for the temp agency, when Oscar buzzed me from the street. Hadn't seen his ass in weeks since the first days of his return. Jesus, Oscar, I said. Come up, come up. I waited for him in the hall, and when he stepped out of the elevator, I put the mitts on him. How are you, bro? I'm copacetic, he said. We sat down and I broke up a Dutch while he filled me in. I'm going back to Don Bosco soon. Word? I said. Word, he said. His face was still fucked up, the left side a little droopy. You want to smoke? I might partake, just a little though. I would not want to cloud my faculties. That last day on our couch, he looked like a man at peace with himself. A little distracted, but at peace. I would tell Lola that night that it was because he'd finally decided to live, but the truth would turn out to be a little more complicated. You should have seen him. He was so thin. He had lost the weight and was still. What had he been doing? Writing, of course, and reading, also getting ready to move from Patterson, wanting to put the past behind him, start a new life, was trying to decide what he would take with him, was allowing himself only 10 of his books, the core of his canon, his words, was trying to pare it all down to what was necessary, only what I can carry. It seemed like another odd Oscar thing, until later we would realize it wasn't. And then, after an inhale, he said, "Please forgive me, Junior, but I'm here with an ulterior motive. I wish to know if you could do me a favor. Anything, bro, just ask it." He needed money for his security deposit, had a line on an apartment in Brooklyn. I should have thought about it. Oscar never asked anybody for money, but I didn't, fell over myself to give it to him, my guilty conscience. We smoked the Dutch and talked about the problems me and Lola were having. You should never have had carnal relations with that Paraguayan girl, he pointed out. I know, I said. I know. She loves you. I know that. Why do you cheat on her then? If I knew that, it wouldn't be a problem. Maybe you should try to find out. He stood up. You ain't going to wait for Lola? I must be away to Patterson. I have a date. You're shitting me. He shook his head. The tricky fuck. I asked, is she beautiful? He smiled. She is. On Saturday, he was gone. The final voyage. The last time he flew to Santo Domingo, he'd been startled when the applause broke out, but this time he was prepared, and when the plane landed, he clapped until his hands stung. As soon as he hit the airport exit, he called Clive's, and Homeboy picked him up. An hour later, found him surrounded by taxistas who were trying to pull him into their cabs. Cristiano, Clive said, "What are you doing here?" "It's the ancient powers," Oscar said grimly. "They won't leave me alone." They parked in front of her house and waited almost 7 hours before she returned. Clive tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. Then she pulled up in the Pathfinder. She looked thinner. His heart seized like a bad leg, and for a moment he thought about letting the whole thing go, about returning to Bosco and getting on with his miserable life, but then she stooped over as if the whole world was watching, and that settled it. He winched down the window. "Iban," he said. She stopped, shaded her eyes, and then recognized him. She said his name too, Oscar. He popped the door and walked over to where she was standing and embraced her. Her first words, "Mi amor, you have to leave right now." In the middle of the street, he told her how it was. He told her that he was in love with her and that he'd been hurt, but now he was all right. And if he could just have a week alone with her, one short week, then everything would be fine in him and he would be able to face what he had to face. And she said, "I don't understand." And so he said it again, that he loved her more than the universe. And it was something that he could shake. "So please come away with me for a little while. Lend me your strength. Then it would be over," if she wanted. Maybe she did love him a little bit. Maybe in her heart of hearts, she left the gym bag on the concrete and got in the taxi with him. But she'd known men like the Capitan all her life, had been forced to work in Europe 1 year straight by niggers like that before she could start earning her own money. Knew also that in the Dominican Republic, they called a cop divorce a bullet. The gym bag was not left on the street. I'm going to call him, Oscar," she said, misting up a little. "So please go before he gets here." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Go," she said. "No," he answered. He let himself into his abuela's house. He still had the key. The Capitan showed up an hour later, honked his horn a long time, but Oscar didn't bother to go out. He had gotten out all of La Inca's photographs, was going through each and every one. When La Inca returned from the bakery, she found him scribbling on the kitchen table. Oscar? Yes, abuela, he said, not looking up. It's me. It's hard to explain, he wrote his sister later. I bet it was. Curse of the Caribbean. For 20 days, he did two things. He researched, wrote, and he chased her. Sat in front of her house, called her on her beeper, went to the world-famous Riverside where she worked, walked to the supermarket, wherever he saw her truck pull out, just in case she was on her way there. 9 times out of 10, she was not. The neighbors, when they saw him on the curb, shook their heads and said, "Look at that loco." At first, it was pure terror for her. She didn't want nothing to do with him. She wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't acknowledge him, and the first time she saw him at the club, she was so frightened her legs buckled under her. He knew he was scaring her shitless, but he couldn't help it. By day 10, though even terror was too much effort, and when he followed her down an aisle or smiled at her at work, she would hiss, "Please go home, Oscar." She was miserable when she saw him, and miserable she would tell him later when she didn't, convinced that he'd gotten killed. He slipped long, passionate letters under her gate, written in English, and the only response he got was when the Capitan and his friends called and threatened to chop him into pieces. After each threat, he recorded the time and then phoned the embassy and told them that Officer Blank had threatened to kill him. Could you please help? He had hope because if she really wanted him gone, she could have lured him out in the open and let the Capitan destroy him. Because if she wanted to, she could have had him banned from the Riverside, but she didn't. "Boys, you can dance good," he wrote in a letter, and another he laid out the plans he had to marry her and take her back to the States. She started scribbling back notes and passed them to him at the club, or had them mailed to his house. "Please, Oscar, I haven't slept in a week. I don't want to end up hurt or dead. Go home." "But beautiful girl, above all beautiful girls," he wrote back, "this is my home. Your real home, mi amor. A person can't have two." Not 19, Iban rang at the gate, and he put down his pen, knew it was her. She leaned over and unlocked the truck door, and when he got in, he tried to kiss her, but she said, "Please, stop it." They drove out toward La Romana, where the Capitan didn't have friends supposedly. Nothing new was discussed, but he said, "I like your new haircut," and she started laughing and crying and said, "Really? You don't think it makes me look cheap?" "You and cheap do not compute, Iban." What could we do? Lola flew down to see him, begged him to come home, told him he was only going to get Iban and himself killed. He listened and then said quietly that he didn't understand what was at stake. "I understand perfectly," she yelled. "No," he said sadly, "you don't." His abuela tried to exert her power, tried to use the voice, but he was no longer the boy she'd known. Something had changed about him. He had gotten some power of his own. 2 weeks into the final voyage, his mother arrived, and she came loaded for bear. "You're coming home right now." He shook his head. "I can't, Mommy." She grabbed him and tried to pull, but he was like Unas, the untouchable. "Mommy," he said softly, "you'll hurt yourself. And you'll kill yourself. That's not what I'm trying to do. Did I fly down? Of course I did. With Lola. Nothing brings a couple together quite like catastrophe. Et tu, Junor, he said when he saw me. Nothing worked. Okay. I'm reading the acknowledgement, sorry. I'm deciding if I want to continue, and I think I'm just going to leave. There's only a few pages, and that will be for tomorrow. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks so much for joining me this evening here for our it's not a special classroom. We just finished up our work today a little late. Dr. Annette Feravich, You are here in the classroom with the teacher. This has been the reading room. We are reading The Brief, Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Thanks for joining me.